Hi, welcome to another session on the Expanded States of Consciousness World Summit. My name is Fleet Mall, your co-host for this session, and I'm really thrilled to be here today with my friend and colleague, Dr. Ron Siegel. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm really looking forward to this, and I really enjoy our conversations for a number of our summits, and it's always an adventure and a journey, and really enjoyable. So I'm going to start off by sharing your bio with our audience, and then we'll jump right in. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So, Ron Siegel, PsyD, is an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School and a longtime student of mindfulness meditation. He serves on the board of directors and faculty for the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy and teaches internationally about mind body medicine and the application of mindfulness and compassion practices in psychotherapy. Dr. Siegel is the author of numerous books, including The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are, and The Mindfulness Solution, Everyday Practices for Everyday Problems. He co-authored Sitting Together, Essential Skills for Mindfulness-Based Psychotherapy, and Backsense. He is a regular contributor to numerous professional publications and is the co-director of the annual Harvard Medical School Conference on Meditation and Psychotherapy. He maintains a private clinical practice in Massachusetts, providing mindfulness-oriented psychotherapy. Okay.
And I will just add, since it's so relevant, also co-director of the relatively new, we're about to do a third year Harvard Medical School conference on psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and the pairing of the phrase Harvard Medical School and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is a wonderful new development.
That absolutely is a wonderful development. It's amazing how the landscape has shifted in a few years, and it's really a blessing for so many who can now benefit from these therapeutic models and interventions. So, um, your background has long time background has been in integrating mindfulness and psychotherapy, and over a period of decades, mindfulness kind of took the world of psychotherapy by storm. In a way, there's so many of the therapeutic models are now integrated with mindfulness, and even when you look up, sometimes I'm trying to help somebody find a therapist, and I may even be looking in that data list that I think Psychology Today, the magazine, has this online listing, and it's hard to find a psychotherapist that doesn't list mindfulness something as part of their repertoire, right? And so, and now with the emergence of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, you're very involved in this emerging movement and of the integration of psychedelic experiences, plant medicine experiences, with psychotherapeutic models of various kinds. And so I wonder if we could begin by just talking a little bit about that. What's that pathway of that integration been like for you as a practitioner and a teacher and a trainer and someone convening conferences on this subject? Where are we with that, and what's that pathway been like for you?
Yeah, well, for me, what I find most interesting are the confluences between what we've learned about the potentially healing properties of mindfulness practices and the potentially healing properties of psychedelics. They seem to be very much rowing in the same direction, even though the experiences are usually different in intensity. And I see both of them as helping to illuminate some of the patterns of mind that tend to perpetuate suffering and some of the pathways to alleviating that suffering. And in fact, I've kind of been forming a model in my mind that there are kind of four essential propensities of the mind that develop because they had evolutionary advantage. They helped us to survive and reproduce, that tend to make us miserable, that these non-ordinary states help to counteract. And briefly, there are tendency to pull away from pain and go toward pleasure. Very, very basic in all of us. If any organism didn't have those instincts, they wouldn't survive for long. In humans, it's our propensity to think, right? To constantly be planning for the future, analyzing the past, strategizing for usually our own welfare or that of those close to us. Our tendency to reify things, to see things as solid, that are actually fluid, to not get it, that everything is always really changing, and that consciousness is this river of in which, yes, the river remains, but the drops of water at each moment are really quite different. And then finally, that our narratives about ourselves, our whole ways of thinking about who we are as somehow separate, and all of our anxieties, our longings, um, our drives to take care of me or feel good about me or get what I want are actually kind of counterproductive, and they mask the fact that we're actually all very much part of this larger ecosystem, the human family, the web of life, the entire universe. And interestingly, both mindfulness practices and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy tend to serve as antidotes to those very basic propensities of mind that create so much suffering. So I find it very exciting to see these two different pathways that have a lot of synergies between them, are distinct in some ways, but are definitely seem to be rowing in the same direction.
Hmm. So that's a very interesting framework. The second one, where you talked about our ability to think and use this mind to continually, think about the past, reflect on the past, strategize for the future, plan and strategize. So you can see how that's very evolutionarily helpful, especially perhaps when human beings are at the hunter-gatherer stage, and we can learn. It's basically a process of learning. If I can learn, what did I learn about that last hunt to help me be more successful on the next hunt, right? And or where am I going to find food and gather food and so forth. So there's a whole the use of the mind, and that could reach greater complexities, as the way of getting our needs met and the sources of food and shelter gets more sophisticated, more complex. But then along with that comes in the fourth one you brought in, where while we're doing that, we have this extra capacity to have a running commentary going on the whole time we're doing that. And that, seems to be somewhere between self-awareness and self-consciousness. And it's kind of interesting overlap there, and especially in terms of human neurosis and psychotherapy and our suffering, of the difference between self-awareness and self-consciousness. And this, of course, also I think is one of the connecting points with mindfulness and psychedelics, is at least there's speculation that one of the reasons that both of them can help us open to uh, expanded states on some level, from very simple movements from constriction to openness to perhaps more of the non-ordinary states, may have something to do with a repression or redirection of the activity of the default mode network.
Yeah,
And yeah, so that seems to be connected to this whole issue of self-consciousness and self-thinking and self-awareness and self-consciousness and self-sensing, constant selfing and self-sensing and all of that.
yeah. There's a lot in what you just said. Just to respond to a few elements of it, one of them is that we seem to create our sense of self with our constant thinking, right? Hmm, I'm a little hungry. What would I like for lunch today? Oh, hey, I did a good job writing that paper. Oh, I really messed up in that interview. All of these kinds of comments about ourselves are created with thinking, not to mention our identities. Oh, I'm Ron. I'm a psychologist. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm usually pretty good with words. I'm not so good if you give me paper and pencil and say draw something, and on and on and on. It's with our words that we create our sense of separate self, and where we totally torture ourselves with self-conscious self-evaluation. Right? I'm either doing well or doing poorly. I'm noble. Um, I'm a wretch, and the other ways in which we judge ourselves. So that, very interestingly, this capacity which developed for our survival, and even the tendency to compare ourselves to others, which is part of a survival instinct. That one derives really from the way in which social mammals organize themselves into dominance hierarchies and are always comparing themselves to one another, because if you're at the top of the heap, your chances for reproduction and sending resources toward your partner and your kids were increased. So even the concern for how do I compare to others, that translates in the modern world into self-esteem, preoccupations, that derives from a survival instinct too, but they really do cause a lot of suffering. And interestingly, both mindfulness and the psychedelics, to loop back to that, part of the expanded state of consciousness that they help to foster is one in which we step out of the usual planning, thinking, evaluative thought stream, right? We're not so into judging, we're not calculating how to achieve our goals, but we're entering into a whole other inner world of images, perhaps thoughts, but sensations flowing and changing, rather than the sort of deliberate way in which we use thought that is tied to accomplishing our goals on the one hand, but also constructing this kind of limited, self-preoccupied sense of self on the other hand.
Yeah, just following up on that kind of understanding our challenges, right? Maybe before we start looking at solutions. Imagining back again, and maybe it's partly speculative, but I think there's anthropological research and psychosocial research around this. At the hunter-gatherer stage, although, we certainly were developing those thought processes and the planning and the learning and the so forth and the strategizing, that it was in service of survival, and it was in service of survival of the group. Now, those groups may have had some kind of dominance hierarchies in them. They certainly did, but unless you're on top, you were pretty much part of the group. So, but it was more about the group, and also they're in the natural world. And I recently interviewed our friend and colleague Mark Coleman about his work, Awake in the Wild. And he's a mindfulness teacher that does a lot of taking people into nature and integrating nature work and wilderness work with mindfulness work. And it changes everything when you get outdoors, right? You're in a completely different ecosystem. And you're even just being out there for a while, that constant internal self-conscious stream tends to start to diminish because the world you're in is just more interesting than that,
Yeah.
right? And so, so there are those parallels. But then you take us modern humans, and we're so disconnected from the natural world, and we're so individualistic, especially in Western society and even American society, so individualistic that we just live in this universe of our constant self-sensing and strategizing and opinion making and insecurities and it becomes deafening.
Yeah. Yeah, and you point out something very important there, which is that not only do we have instincts toward individual survival, but we also have instincts toward group survival, right? We have instincts toward cooperation, toward love, toward justice, toward sharing. The problem we face as humans is that these instincts are somewhat hierarchically organized, so that if we experience ourselves as under an immediate threat, including simply a threat to our self-image, we respond in a way that isn't so concerned with others. Oftentimes, if the bus is barreling down the street at me, I'm only concerned with my safety. But similarly, if I'm about to be humiliated, I may be only concerned with avoiding the humiliation, not with the welfare of others around us. And one of the interesting things that some of these expanded states do is they seem to soften this kind of individualistic instinct, the what do I need for me now instinct, and certainly soften the how do I look instinct. And instead, they make us notice that we're part of something much, much larger than that, that we are part of the human family, that, oh, everybody's brokenhearted, everybody is suffering here. We start to have these insights, not just intellectually, but emotionally also. And those can be game changers in terms of freeing us from some of the more individualistic tendencies of the mind and the brain that cause a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, that seems to be a trajectory that we find with both mindfulness and psychedelics towards what sometimes is called a more world-centric mindset, or even ecocentric or Gaia consciousness. So we start to move from our solo preoccupation with our own needs to maybe the family, the society, the greater good, the greater world, even beyond just identifying with our nation, but becoming more world-centric and so forth, and then conscious of the whole ecosystem and so forth. One of the reasons I think that we struggle with having a more consistent, and until we progress in these ways, right? Otherwise, one of the reasons I think we're struggling is we don't have a clear sense of where we belong. like we don't have a clear sense, I'm part of this clan, I'm part of this tribe. We may have a sense of family, but even the family has become so deconstructed into these habits. I used to, the extended family, or even the single family unit. Now it's it's everybody's out running around doing their own thing, and we don't really have something that's really for most of it. It's probably our primary relationship if we're in a relationship, and beyond that, the rest of it's pretty loose.
Yeah. And in the United States current context, families can't even get together at Thanksgiving if they have differing political views because
Yeah.
it breaks down into a battle. So, no, there's a lot of this kind of division and lack of belonging. And the thing you say about nature too, I remember there's an image that Ram Dass used to use in his teaching, and he'd say, when we go into the woods, we don't tend to judge the trees so much. Some are tall and straight, some are bent. You can see how, for phototropism, they had to bend around an obstacle. Some are lying on the ground and they're rotting and being consumed by fungi. And we don't tend to think that's a good tree, that's a bad tree. We tend to think of the woods as a beautiful whole. The second we wander out of the woods, we start evaluating everybody, right? Oh, well, that's a really cool person. I like that kind of person. Oh, that's one of those people I don't like. Oh, that's probably somebody who supports the other political party, on and on and on. We start with our discriminatory judgments. And it is interesting how nature is an antidote and how nature is an antidote to thinking. I remember there was a study that some researchers did at Stanford, people who were stuck with a lot of rumination. We're all stuck with a lot of rumination from the point of view of mindfulness or psychedelic experiences. If you taste what it feels like to not be in the thought stream for a bit, normal consciousness is pretty ruminative, but these were people who were particularly stuck in rumination. And they had half of them walk down University Ave or up and down University Ave for like half an hour, 45 minutes or so. And they had the other half go out to, I don't know, Radar Land or one of those places, Stanford, where you're out in nature. And then they came up with some measure for how much you stuck in your thoughts, right? And guess what? The ones who had been in the city were quite stuck in their thoughts. The ones who had been on the countryside a little bit, they had started to relax. They had started to let go of that. So nature is another pathway to beginning to relax that the second affliction I mentioned, which is the propensity to get stuck in thoughts and believe in thoughts and be tortured by our thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think we can circle back to the connection between nature and psychedelic experiences and so forth. But I think what we described, we could go on and on about this, but it's no wonder we have a mental health crisis, and in so many myriad forms, affecting so many people, suffering so much, and suicidality, and young people, and anxiety, depression, and all the rest of it. Between all the environmental factors and everything we just have been describing. So. I'd like to shift our conversation to start explore what we mean a bit by expanded states, and maybe even just starting off with just psychotherapy itself, because psychotherapy has long made use of expanded state experiences, not necessarily the profoundly non-ordinary ones, but in some cases, I mean, even things like free association and things like that in psychoanalysis, and then mindfulness certainly even is about moving from a constricted state to an open state, certainly. And, deep meditation can lead to some profound, non-ordinary experiences, but even, mindfulness and mindful self-compassion and these things, the kind of mindfulness practices that have been integrated with psychotherapy, all these things do involve expanded states, perhaps not at the more profoundly non-ordinary level, but they do involve expanded states. So I wonder if you could talk about how that facilitates the therapeutic process, and then maybe we can shift and talk about the psychedelic experience.
Sure. I think it facilitates it by being an antidote to those propensities of the brain we were talking about, particularly the individualist propensities of the brain. Most of the non-ordinary states we work with in psychotherapy help people to befriend their demons in some way, whether that's simply by being with a trusted individual. It is a non-ordinary state to be with another human being who is just interested in our experience without their own agenda. even when we're with a caring friend, the caring friend will usually give us advice, right? Or they'll share their story because they want us to hear their story. It's not quite the same. It is an interesting, non-ordinary state to be with somebody who's just interested in us. And one of the things that happens when somebody's just interested and really curious about us is we start to connect with parts of ourselves that otherwise we might not have noticed. We might connect to memories that have been difficult. All of us push things out of awareness that are painful. It's part of this very basic aversion response that we all have. And as one of my patients put it so aptly, when we bury feelings, we bury them alive, right? They're still there. And so simply the non-ordinary state of being listened to by a compassionate, caring person starts to help us to connect with things that have been pushed out of awareness. And keeping things out of awareness is at the heart of things like PTSD, because it's the intrusion, if you will, of the previously blocked out experience. That's the heart of PTSD. It's central to anxiety disorders, where people are basically trying to micromanage their world in order not to feel anxious. I won't go on airplanes. I won't do public speaking. I won't go to the party because I hate that feeling of anxiety. And that's the heart of anxiety disorders. Substance use disorders are all about this. I need my substance in order not to feel something painful. Mm-hmm. And even depression, where we shut down to not feel pain. So that's the first non-ordinary state we use. The other one you mentioned, free association, certainly in psychoanalysis. If you were to lie on a couch and actually master the art of speaking out loud everything that came to mind, you'd be in quite a trippy state. Because there's a lot in there, and all sorts of imagery starts to become available to us. And when psychoanalysis is working in its deeper magic, that's exactly what's going on. And things like parts work, things like internal family systems that our friend, Dick Schwartz developed. When you start to go inside and talk to your vulnerable parts, or allow them to speak, or allow the protector parts that serve to keep the vulnerable parts safe to speak. That's a very interesting, imaginal, fluid world in which we connect to things that were otherwise painful. So we've been in this business. Body work is about this, right? Because, our friend and colleague Bessel van der Kolk, the idea of the body keeps the score, and many others have pointed out that trauma is all stored in the constriction of the body. Wilhelm Reich, the sort of father of body work, he pointed this out, that every time that we defend against something, we do it by constricting the body. Yoga does this, right, by expanding the body. So there are so many different things that we do in psychotherapy and outside of psychotherapy that are about this project of befriending our demons, and there are similar ways that the non-ordinary states that we cultivate in psychotherapy help us with at least having perspective on our thoughts, if not stepping out of the thought stream, noticing the impermanence of things and fluidity, and if not having non-dual experiences, the sort of full enchiladas you said that come from deeper meditative work or psychedelic work. Even a cognitive behavior therapy can help us to begin to see, wait a minute, where did I get that narrative about who I am? Wait, where did I get that way of thinking about myself? And that by beginning to see the origins of our core beliefs, we start to see that our sense of self is a somewhat socially constructed phenomena, even if we don't have the sort of intense, direct experience of it falling away.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting how even the use of this term non-ordinary states. So I think it may be helpful to clarify our lexicon here. So we're definitely talking about expanded states of consciousness, and it's kind of sad that even like having someone actually really be there for you, listening to you, that seems non-ordinary because it's sad that that's the case. But I think non-ordinary states is often used to reply to where there's a real perceptual field difference, right? Even seemingly hallucinatory or really different perceptual dimensions, or even out of body experiences and so forth. But you're right. Things just becoming more fluid is already kind of getting into the non-ordinary state realm. And so psychotherapy has been in this area of expanded states, moving in the direction of these really truly non-ordinary states. And another type of psychotherapy that would seem to really go in that direction is dream work of various kinds, whether it was Freudian dream analysis or whether it's depth therapy, Jungian analysis, and that if someone's really working with their dreams in a therapeutic context, then that probably changes how they're dreaming, and there starts to have a whole nother thing going on in their dream life, which is certainly getting into expansive. And that has roots that go way back into Asclepian therapy and the Greek temples of healing, which were, as far as we know, were mostly about dream work.
Yeah. And simply sitting in a therapy session and recalling a dream.
Mm-hmm.
We enter, when we recall it, we're in it.
Yeah.
We start to move into this world that's nonlinear and that's imaginal and is fluid and contains our demons, and in which there isn't a coherent, consistent, solid I. There's the unfolding experience of the dream images arising. So I think you're very right that there are many different aspects of psychotherapy that have moved us out of goal-oriented linear thinking and narrowing our focus to our desires, which we might call ordinary consciousness.
It would seem that moving into these more fluid states, at whatever level of expanded state or non-ordinary, and these more fluid states, some of the benefits, as you describe it, could be, let's say before that happens, and we're really stuck in some form of suffering, right? And depression, anxiety, addictions, and that, and really even just ordinary human suffering and neurosis. We're kind of we're stuck in this overactive, self-conscious kind of neurotic mind, and we're highly identified with it, right? We really believe that's who we are, and so much so that even the possibility of being different than that can be threatening.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I'm not, maybe I'm suffering, but if I was something else, would it be better? If I'm not that, who am I? It could just be very destabilizing, right?
Yeah. Oh, and there's also just the simplest example. People are afraid to not be anxiously vigilant because they're afraid that, they're thinking that their anxious vigilance protects them from dangers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just that anything that kind of helps all that whole structure become a little more fluid could weaken the identification in that's all I am, right?
Right.
And then we might begin to have some experiences where we almost stand outside of that and can look at that, right? And that could lead to a lot of possibilities. It could lead to insights about the structures of our suffering. In the parts work of IFS, it can eventually lead to stabilizing that place from where we can look at all that and the arising of what in IFS they call self with a capital S. And from that place, the possibility of a lot of integration and healing and so forth can all work. So it seems like there's a lessening of a constricted, limited self-identification, then the possibilities of insight, and then the possibilities of stabilizing a larger context that can do the metabolizing, the integrating of all this stuff that is underlying our structures of suffering. Is that?
I would say absolutely. Those are some of the ways in which therapy can work, and there are ways in which psychedelics can accelerate this process, because under the influence of psychedelics, all of our demons appear, usually pretty quickly and pretty vividly. And, we start practicing the cardinal rule of a psychedelic journey, and particularly in the therapeutic context, which is to trust, allow, and let go, and to move toward whatever arises. And we very quickly learn that the second I resist, push away, try to stop some phenomena from arising in consciousness during a psychedelic voyage, it gets worse. Because psychedelic medicines tend to be mind manifesting, that being the sort of origins of that term psychedelic, if what we're beginning to have is fear and aversion, it will literally, with a classical psychedelic such as LSD or psilocybin, it will literally appear as a fearsome monster. Like we will actually have the visualization of something fearful. And then if we resist that because that's a very scary image and we don't want to hang around, that's going to amplify. And so we learn pretty early in the process, oh, that doesn't work. What works is moving toward allowing and letting go. And then that very same skill set then can be applied during the rest of our life when we encounter our demons. And similarly, for all the other propensities with psychedelics, we really do step out of linear thought. Thoughts arise and pass, but they're going by too quickly. It's like trying to grab hold of part of a river. It just goes through our fingers. So we settle into just some metacognitive awareness, seeing thoughts as thoughts. And we get it that it's all fluid because it's so fluid. And in fact, in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, music is so often employed to support the fluidity, to help people not to get stuck, because music, the kind of playlists that people use are constantly changing. So it supports that fluidness. And then finally, with psychedelics, we have often the very radical sense of, oh my God, my stories about me are just stories, where we feel part of the larger world. We feel part of the web of life. We feel part of human history. And we may even be quite aware that we're a brief part of human history and that we're going to die. So all of those insights can be quite supportive of the broader psychotherapeutic project.
So let's explore for a moment the actual practice of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Maybe we could divide it into three parts: preparation, the journey itself, and then integration. And so a lot of what you've spoken about, and it would seem like a lot of what we've learned about the integration of mindfulness and psychotherapy, self-compassion and psychotherapy, that integration could provide ideal preparation for someone to then do a psychedelic journey, a psychedelic session. And probably they would, and then we can talk for a minute about how to create the best circumstances for a session. But even that preliminary work, and if they have some experience with working with their own mind, they're probably going to be able to navigate that journey in a more beneficial way. And then we can talk about how some of these same things can then support integration. But maybe you could talk first a little bit about preparation, and then the session itself. In most schools of thought, there's not a lot of intervention going on. It's kind of let the medicine do its work. You're holding space, reassuring maybe, but most of the actual psychotherapeutic intervention seems to happen before and after. So maybe we could talk about preparation, then a little bit the session itself, and then the integration process.
Sure. Well, in preparation, you hit the nail on the head that mindfulness would seem to be mindfulness training would seem to be excellent preparation for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And there's even been a couple of little research studies suggesting that that's true, that when people had a mindfulness practice prior to entering into psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, the results of the therapy were more robust. Small studies, but still, it serves to reason. Trust, let go, and open. Well, that's a pretty good description of a mindful attitude toward experience. So clearly, the more mindful we can be entering into a journey, the better it's likely to go, the more useful it's likely to be, and the less likely we're probably going to get into difficulty, because if we've already discovered in our own meditation practice that, we can turn attention toward that which is difficult rather than try to stop it, distract ourselves, etc., then we're going to have that habit available to us, or that skill available to us when we're in the actual medicine session itself. And it's true, most people these days certainly most of the formal research studies use a kind of supportive, there's a natural healing intelligence, let's let the medicine do its work attitude toward the actual medication sessions themselves. Although there are attempts here and there to integrate a little bit of body work, for example, if a person seems to be getting stuck. But generally, people aren't in a frame of mind to be talking a lot, so less likely to be doing that. But then in the integration phase, meaning let's both try to make sense of or find the meaning inherent in what has happened in the medicine stages. And if what happened under the influence of medicine is either a lot of material that had been kept out of awareness coming back into awareness, or perhaps our conventional sense of self being challenged in such a way that we start to experience ourselves as far more fluid than that, or simply really getting it about transientness and impermanence, or really getting it that our thoughts are pretty driven by our affects and aren't to be trusted. Any one of these insights, which can be quite destabilizing and quite unsettling. If we've got a mindfulness practice going, well, that gives us a way to work with all this. And if that mindfulness practice, especially, I think, if it's in the context of a spiritual tradition, like a Buddhist tradition, for example, then there's a kind of map for all of this that starts to make sense. Oh, I get it. What I am trying to do is open to all my experience and integrate these things rather than how do I live a life that minimizes pain. Oh, I get it. I've been practicing stepping out of the thought stream. When in mindfulness practice, we bring our attention back to the breath, back to the breath, or back to the footsteps, back to the footsteps, we start to develop some of this metacognitive awareness and realize that, oh no, there's a way to be embodied as Ron that's not about thinking. That's simply about being embodied in the body, getting it that everything's transient. Well, yeah, like that's that's been taught about quite a bit in these traditions. Everything constantly is changing, and that the goal shouldn't be necessarily how do I reconstitute my conventional sense of self, how do I boost my self-esteem or feel more sure of myself, but rather, oh, well, how can I experience myself as an unfolding organism that's part of a larger ecosystem? Even if we have a cognitive map that says that's what we're inching toward, well, it's going to make it much easier to work with these experiences. And then we can use our daily mindfulness practice to actually allow these things to happen, guided by the larger conceptual map.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your thoughts on kind of the immediate post-session integration work. Our colleague Sonny Strasberg calls that just coming out of the session, her experience with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and integrating that with internal family systems. She calls that like the golden period or the golden hour. That there's in the client there's a quality of openness and pliability and fluidity, as well as insight happening there where they can do really good work. But people can, in many strong psychedelic journeys, have a moment where the self is really going to dissolve on you. Your whole and you could either kind of panic at that point, or you let go and you go with it, with the basic instruction to allow and let go. And because if you do try to hold on there, it's just going to create fear and panic, right? So, but many people will have let go, and they'll have had an experience that, especially if this is their first psychedelic journey, of just being completely beyond and out of that normal self construct. And then they start coming down and back into feeling their body in the room, and here I am, and here you are, and somebody's supporting them. And so there can be a greater need in some than others for just a basic grounding. So it seems like some of the risks that could happen would be a destabilization from those experiences, or an inflation of imagining that one has transcended and is now, able to occupy some transcendent space. So those would kind of be seen almost two polarities between destabilization and some kind of inflation of reifying something. And so I wonder about, just the immediate post-session of the integrating work, and then how the therapist can hold space for that person to have their own journey. Because at that point, depending on the type of therapy, it could be very Rogerian of just holding space and following the client wherever they're going, or it could be a little more of an intervention, a little more directive. It might employ some actual things like parts work and IFS or other modalities. So I'm just curious about, that immediate hour or two or three following a psychedelic journey.
Yeah, this is a an emerging area in the field of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, in which various people who are skilled and often have done research in different therapeutic modalities are beginning to investigate what happens if we mix a particular modality with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And you mentioned IFS. There are people doing that work. There are people using ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, in relation to this. There are people using psychoanalysis in relation to psychedelics, and certainly people doing mindfulness oriented treatments in relation to this, and doing psychedelic assisted mindfulness practice, using it to assist in a spiritual path. Most of the neurobiological models that I'm familiar with suggest that what's happening with psychedelics, and it's quite complex, of course, but that one of the things that's happening is it's a period of greater neuroplasticity. Exactly as you said, more openness to learning, more openness to change, and less clinging to previous ways of organizing experience. And as such, it's both an opportunity and a risky time, right? Because it's it is an opportunity for growth, and it is kind of risky because there are many people whose problem in life is not that their conventional coping strategies are, work very well, but keep their life somewhat constricted. A lot of people who are grasping around for coping strategies because they're so easily feeling overwhelmed, either by painful memories, by self-critical thoughts, by shaky feelings about who I am. And, so for some people, what we're going to want in this integrative period, including the immediate post-medicine session integration, is going to be, okay, how do I stay open to this fluidity? How do I stay open to really feeling my vulnerability, really feeling my past hurts? How do I stay open to this awareness that there's no solid Ron here? But for somebody else, they're going to need something a little more conventionally reassuring, right? How can I get a sense that I can still function in the world despite some of these insights? So I think that, how we work with these periods is going to have to be somewhat tailored to the individual, and even who psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is going to be most useful for is something that we're very much at the beginning of exploring. Because my late friend Jack Engler wrote an article, I think 40 years ago, with the title, "Do You Have to Become a Somebody Before Becoming a Nobody?" That was addressing aspects of intensive meditative practice that are designed to bring about non-dual states and help people let go of their conventional sense of self or deconstruct it a bit. And the question was, is this wise for everybody, or might this be too destabilizing? So that's tricky. And I just want to address the inflation part, because I think that's super important. It's part of my autobiographical history. My first profound transpersonal state was brought about by LSD, having followed this little book called The Psychedelic Experience. It was written by Tim Leary and Richard Alpert and Ralph Metzner, where they roughed out how to have a psychedelic experience, very loosely modeled on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I kind of followed the instructions, and it happened, right? I had these experiences of what we might call personal unconscious or Freudian unconscious, of, longings, anxieties about my girlfriend, feelings of inadequacy, all that sort of stuff. The usual meat and potatoes of therapy came on strong. And then there was this Jungian period, if you will, a mythopoetic images and magic and mystery. And then it all cleared out, and there was this simple, ordinary street corner in suburban Long Island, only with no sense of separate self, with simply a sense that this organism was simply present and part of the larger universe. And it was like, oh, wow, I get it. The world's divided into people who have seen this and people who haven't. And while there's a little truth to that, it's really easy to get inflated with that kind of thing. And it's really easy to put too much stock in it. Because, as I think we've said in other discussions, I'd much rather have a friend who's never heard of this stuff, but is a nice, decent human being who knows how to be kind to others than somebody who's had a wonderful, mind-blowing transpersonal experience but hasn't integrated it and doesn't know how to be kind and doesn't know how to see his or her own ordinariness.
I'd like to maybe just a little further about this is incredibly helpful. The role of the therapist in the immediate post session, and then I'd like to talk a little more about long term integration. So, I can almost imagine, I say, especially where this is happening in a context of someone has an ongoing therapeutic relationship with the therapist who's holding space for you and going to do the integration work. And so as a therapist, they might be, they've had this client for a while and they've dealt with all their resistances and their shutdown and the frustrations of, and then here they are, they're facing their client who's in this completely open, fluid state. And it could almost be like, oh, now I can put on my master therapist hat and really get to work here, right? Which might not be the best thing in the world. And of course, what they could do is then bring really good therapeutic skills, and comes back to what you originally described as an almost a non-ordinary state of just having someone really be present for you and really listen to you. So it could be that they're holding space in such a way that I think I've heard Dan Siegel discuss of giving someone else the experience of feeling felt and being seen and being presenced, and then what could follow with that in terms of could be again more Rogerian or it could be more interventional, but I'm wondering about what you think of in terms of the clinician and how they really need to approach that space.
Yeah, I think carefully, because most of us who have been in clinical practice for a period of time have seen folks who seem to be kind of casualties of psychotherapies that were not skillful, right? Where they tell us about things. I don't know if I don't have a videotape. I'm not sure the therapist said that, but if the therapist said that or did that, that was not skillful, and it was injurious. When people are in these super opened up states, the chances of injuring somebody are greater, right? That they're because they're just more vulnerable, and I think this is where the first the first thing we need to do is our own work on ourselves the best we can. And whether that, I think, if you're going to do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, it helps to have personal experiences with psychedelics. It's very hard to imagine what these states are like if you haven't sampled them yourself. But also other kind of work, psychospiritual development, in which we have some understanding of our shadows, some understanding of our needs and the like, so that we're at least less likely to do harm at one of these opened up moments, because at least we're less likely to be driven by some need, some personal need of ours. And then to really think back and consider the broad range of possibilities. That one of the things that took me a long time to learn as a psychotherapist is everybody's not just like me. There are ways in which people are similar to me, but people have very different upbringings. They come from very different cultures, and they may need something very different at different moments. And just for example, I almost always benefit from things that help to relax my defenses, right? That when I'm less sane than optimal, it's almost always because I'm too defended. So when things happen where I can open to my own broken heart, when things happen where I can open to my own insignificance, it's almost always part of growth. I almost always look back on that moment and think, oh yeah, it was hard, but I'm glad. Not always so for everybody. Those may be long range goals, but for a lot of people, no, they've been beaten down so often that that they need a respite from some of this. I think of my friend and colleague Willoughby Britton, who did an extensive research project on the adverse effects of mindfulness practices, and she's shared a personal experience where at one point when she was really really struggling, had been doing a lot of very intense practice, which is not unlike psychedelic practice. At a certain point, instead of just thinking, well, good, ego's dissolving, I've got to push further, I've got to push further, I've got to push further. And she just felt quite destabilized by this. She had the thought, what does the positive psychology literature have to say about this? Like what's necessary for human well-being? And it was things like connection to other human beings, engagement in meaningful activity. And she thought, I'm going to back off the intensity of the meditation practice and start going out to dinner with friends more.
Mm-hmm.
And that was helpful, right? So I'm just using this as one example of how we all might need different things at different moments. And one of the things that we need to work out as a therapist is trying to sense what that might be, and if at all possible, collaborating with our client about what that might be. Okay, well, how was that experience for you? What were the days or weeks like afterwards? And do we want to do more of that, or do we want to do less of that as part of the integration? It's a complicated area. It's not one size fits all, and it's not a panacea.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful and so nuanced and so reflective of your decades of experience as a clinician in all of these areas. Maybe just a last brief question, because we're just about out of time, is the longer term integration. There could be an ongoing therapeutic relationship, but it also could be community based in some way. Our colleague Rosalind Watson in the UK has developed an integration community that people can tap into and be part of post psychedelic experiences and post psychedelic assisted therapy, and in the Dharma world, that sense of sangha or something. But just because it's almost like there's going to be for many people, there's going to be a whole new restructuring and meaning making that their current social milieu may not be very open to, or even their immediate family. And that's not to say they need to reject their family or their social media, but they may at least need to spend some time with people that kind of get what they've been through on some level.
Yeah, no, this is enormously important because it's going to just be much too expensive for everybody to have sufficient psychotherapy time to integrate these experiences. These experiences can take years to integrate. And things like Roz's online community intervention seemed like a great idea. I know that at the Aquilino Cancer Center outside of Baltimore, they're doing group models so that the integration sessions can be done in groups, which is, there's a leader, but it's considerably less expensive to have one leader and many people, and you can meet for longer periods of time. One of the critiques that came out of the MAPS trials for MDMA for PTSD was that, it was a scientific research study. So they allotted a certain number of integration sessions, but only a certain number. And while that was sufficient for some people, it wasn't sufficient for other people. And there were people who said, well, I look like a success in the results, in that my PTSD is indeed resolved, but I'm still opened up in a way that I'm uneasy with, and it's going to take me a while to learn how to adjust to this new way of being in the world, and it's been hard to get therapeutic support to do that. So I think we're just the beginning of considering this, and I think that in contemplative traditions, in which there is a community, and in which often, as in Buddhist traditions, there's a real emphasis on the need to connect with other like-minded people doing similar investigation and with similar objectives. We need to have that in the world of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and it's not entirely clear what that's going to look like. And I worry across all of this about exploitation. Again, if that 17-year-old me had set himself up as a shaman, and now that I understand the mysteries of the world's great religions and have had a direct experience, let me guide you through them. much could have gone wrong, you know. And I think there are others, maybe not 17, but maybe 27, who are doing that in a way that that is quite concerning.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Bort, I think you have become a shaman in a certain way, and but you went and got yourself trained and educated and spent many decades doing it right. So in a Western context, so thank goodness for that. So thank you so much for being part of our summit. Everything you shared, incredibly valuable. How can people find out more about your work if they
Uh,
want for that?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So I have a website, drronsiegel.com, spelled like my last name, Siegel. And on that, you can get access to books. There's a lot of meditations you can listen to. There's podcasts and other interviews. There's all sorts of resources that you might tap into. And I'll just plug one that you mentioned in the beginning, which is this relatively recent book, The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are, is really about how can we work with that fourth preoccupation, you know, the one where we're so worried about how we're doing, feeling inadequate so much of the time, we're feeling stressed out, trying to stay on top of our game. Because that I see as the big enchilada of the fruit of all of these non-ordinary states, you know, getting free from thinking that we have to be something special and finding a way to embrace our ordinary humanity.
I love the title of that book. I just hearing the title is healing for me. It just represents so much of what I think we all long for. So
Mhm.
thank you so much, Dr. Ron Siegel. I encourage everyone to check out your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Fleet.